Good afternoon. This session is titled Good Intentions versus Good Laws, Why Housing Advocacy Still Matters. Our speakers today include Dr. Lucile Owens, a professor at the University of Massachusetts School of Law, and she'll provide a brief history on the purpose of housing vouchers, its implementation and failures, and how better execution may have changed the outcome. Following her will be Michael Chavarria. He is the executive director at Hope Fair Housing here in Illinois, and he'll discuss the ongoing challenges faced by home seekers with housing choice vouchers and his organization's efforts to improve housing accessibility through legislative advocacy. And finally, Sharon Norwood is a housing justice organizer with Chicago Fair Housing Alliance, and she'll share her personal experiences with the system, along with her courage and passion for advocacy, which has led to new legislation in Illinois. Over several decades, the federal and state governments have passed numerous expansive laws aimed at creating fair housing so that its citizens can afford it. Why then, despite all the programs and money, do so many Americans fail to have safe, stable housing? Like much of Americans' history, the best intentions of our lawmakers don't always result in effective, well-executed laws. Today's speakers will use the Housing Choice Voucher Program as an example of this, as well as an example of how the fight, our advocacy, still plays an important role in achieving housing goals. Our first speaker today is a professor at University of Massachusetts School of Law. She earned her undergraduate degree in human rights from Birmingham Southern College, her JD from Boston College, an LLM in banking and finance law from Boston University, and has a PhD focused on sociology from Columbia University. Professor Owens served as a lecturer in sociology at Columbia. In her research, explored topics including inequity, public housing, and homelessness. And she's published in a number of different publications, including Sociological Methodology, Critical Sociology, and the Stanford Law and Policy Review. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Dr. Lucile Owens.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Kathy. That was a lovely introduction. Very happy to be here today to talk a little bit about the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And I know many of you are probably very familiar and likely advocates for housing choice and for housing equality. And so forgive me if this is a little bit of a review. But let me start with the idea of what the Housing Choice Voucher Program is. So this is the federal government's program for assisting primarily low-income families, also the elderly and the disabled, to afford housing that's adequate, that's decent, that's safe, that's clean. And this is found in the private market. So this was actually a solution to affordable housing shortage put in place at first by President Nixon. To address that. The idea was that if housing can be found on the private market, it's going to really be an efficient way of making sure that people get adequate housing. And so since housing assistance is provided basically on behalf of individuals and families, they're free to choose their own housing. So they're free to choose, apartment, a home in the neighborhood of their choice. And while choice is not sort of one of the stated goals of the program, it is one of the goals that it really underlies the program, and one that social scientists especially are interested in. And that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today, the central idea, a policy based on choice. So how does choice happen? Are real choices being made in terms of housing? And how can the policy be improved to reflect what happens in practice? So as everyone here knows, in Illinois, one of the central reasons why choice was curtailed in the past was because of income discrimination, which of course the recently passed law will hopefully prevent, which was just the idea that landlords were discriminating against voucher holders. If their income was coming from the voucher, they were not accepting it. So that's, one very clear reason why housing vouchers, weren't working as well as they should. And so because housing vouchers require individuals to find their own housing, and there's a time pressure associated with it, it can be very difficult for families to find housing. This is one thing that I'm going to talk about. As well, there are other requirements of the program. Rental units have to be safe, and this is, obviously a central thing. But some of the inspection processes, for example, required by the voucher program can really mean that, landlords can discriminate in practice against the kind of tenants that they want or don't want. And all of this has really led to a concentration of voucher holders in particular neighborhoods. And that is actually a very complex phenomenon, which again is what I'm going to talk about today. So, for example, in the West Garfield Park neighborhood in Chicago, the number of voucher holders there since 2009 has increased by 59%. Whereas in other areas, generally sort of wealthier areas in the north side or near downtown, the number of voucher holders who are residents there have declined by about 25% in the past decade. So how can voucher programs support real neighborhood choice? And is choice important? So a social scientist would say, yes, choice is important because neighborhoods matter. Certain neighborhoods connect people to opportunities. And speaking in broad statistical swaths without sort of looking at granular detail, more privileged neighborhoods are linked to social mobility, while other neighborhoods, stigmatized neighborhoods known for crime or violence are not linked to social mobility. And experiments in the past, studies in the past have shown that especially for young children who move to neighborhoods of higher opportunity, there's a huge benefit provided as far as social mobility. The picture is more mixed for others. All right, so what are the possible barriers to achieving this kind of ideal of choice? So one might think the housing search and rental process itself, lack of liquidity, difficulties in finding suitable units in high opportunity neighborhoods, landlords, all of these things can limit what choices people have. Another possibility is that low-income families who are voucher holders do not want to move to other neighborhoods because they prefer to stay in neighborhoods that they're familiar with, that have other valuable amenities like shorter commutes, proximity to family and community, or greater racial and ethnic diversity. A third possibility is that families who are voucher holders aren't moving to neighborhoods with higher opportunity because of a lack of information about the benefits of moving to such areas. So I want to discuss the first possibility first. So the idea that there are problems in the housing search and rental process itself that prevent the voucher program from working as it should. So of course, there's obvious, clear supply side problems with the voucher program. Only a fraction of households who qualify for housing assistance receive it. And people may wait up to a decade to get housing assistance. It's also very easy for people to lose vouchers. And so all of this can, in aggregate, lead to problems within the voucher system itself. Of course, President Biden had, part of his initiative is to increase the number of affordable housing units being built, especially through the LIHTC tax incentives. So LIHTC, which it's pronounced LIHTC. It's basically a tax credit that developers get if they are building affordable housing. Those credits are also can be financialized, traded on markets, and so this creates a kind of whole other force that comes to affect affordable housing. Voucher holders are often driven by real estate agents as well to the same spots. So voucher hotspots. Part of this can be because transportation is not easily available. It can be very difficult to find transportation to all of these like different housing opportunities that you have to do, especially when you only have 60 days to find appropriate housing. And this in and of itself really magnifies vulnerability to predatory landlords who have figured out that voucher holders have this time pressure, and that they're kind of put in this situation where they have to make a choice, which may not actually be a choice. There's also discrimination on the basis of race, class, gender, and family status. So landlords can discriminate in many ways. They tend to silo white clients into certain neighborhoods, to silo Black clients into certain neighborhoods. Again, they use the time pressure. And they're also able to weaponize, I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, the program required housing inspection. So for example, if a housing inspection requires them to do something very small, like replace a missing door hinge, they can actually reject a tenant because of that reason. And this really allows them to kind of pick who they want, insofar as the people who are coming to them to rent. And study after study shows that this has really poor outcomes if you're talking about equality and housing equality. And again, there are problems that emerge during the use of vouchers. So voucher holders are prohibited from allowing relatives to stay with them. And if they're caught allowing a relative to live with them, then they can lose their voucher. And of course, anyone who's been a member of a family knows that that's, kind of what being a family member is all about. People really just want to, live their lives. And so to have this kind of artificial constraints on their relationships and things can be very difficult. Landlords also, are unforgiving if there are disagreements. They're known to use surveillance. So if a tenant says that there's a problem with rodents or something like that, they'll use surveillance to show that, oh well, the tenant didn't take out the trash properly or something like that. Also, as far as like small item repairs, there may be small things that the landlord is going to fix, charge the tenant. They won't actually make them repay, but they'll let it sort of accrue into a huge debt that they're basically never going to be able to get out from under. And this kind of traps them in the housing situation and doesn't allow them to kind of move around with their voucher, which is, of course, one of the benefits of having a voucher is having this choice, this ability to pick up and move if you have a rodent problem, or to pick up and move if you feel like a school is going to be better for your kid or something like that. So the second thing I want to discuss is the idea of not having enough information. So that people might not realize that they're able to move to different neighborhoods with their vouchers. And so there's actually a recent study that was done exactly on this point. Researchers from Harvard, UT Austin, Johns Hopkins, and MIT published the results recently. And I'm actually going to post that in the chat here. All right. everyone? And so you can save that for future study if you like. But basically they ran a program which was focused on providing information. So they provided information for people who committed to use their vouchers to move to higher opportunity neighborhoods. They customized the housing search assistance, which, as we know, that's really key, hard to find housing. They engaged with the landlords of, the places that their tenants were applying to, and they were given short-term financial assistance. And this was all administered by sort of a centralized group. Families were met with individually. They were provided information about, where high opportunities neighborhoods were, what they offered. They were helped with their credit and rental history. They were helped preparing the sort of applications. And on average, families generally got about 6 hours of assistance. Then, as the program engaged with landlords in these sort of neighborhoods of higher opportunity, they were able to expedite the lease process, and they also offered landlords an extra insurance policy to kind of help landlords feel better, or to sort of help them feel okay with what was going on. And so with all this done, it costs, a fairly low cost, I think, about $22,670 per family. But it saw a lot of success in getting people to move to neighborhoods of higher opportunity, and also to stay there. So about 60% of families who moved to neighborhoods of higher opportunity wound up staying there. And in a control group where these services weren't provided, it was much lower, I think something like 30%. So that is one, I think, aspect of choice that I think really speaks to the idea that voucher programs, that are there to support people in finding affordable housing, can really be geared to ways to support people in ways that work and make a difference. Okay, so I want to also discuss the third aspect of choice. So one potential explanation for people staying in neighborhoods that are not high opportunity is that these neighborhoods offer other valuable amenities: shorter commutes, proximity to family and community, greater racial and ethnic diversity. So choice is great. It underlies this program, and choice can also mean choosing to stay in a neighborhood that researchers and policymakers describe as stigmatized or low opportunity. So if you read through a lot of the social science literature, as I have, or even a lot of the policy literature, which may be something that you all are more familiar with, you might be left with the feeling that this is a bad idea. However, others, of course, individuals, other groups like the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, also talk about neighborhood preservation as an important aspect of choice. So the other side to this conversation is, we know that the amount of voucher holders is constrained, that there just aren't enough vouchers. And what about those people who don't get vouchers? What about those voucher holders who choose to stay? What about the voucher holders who return? Often, even people who gain opportunity or gain entry to these high opportunity neighborhoods, they aren't able to stay for various reasons. And they often kind of return to neighborhoods which are characterized as low opportunity. So how do we think about the idea that choice will sometimes mean staying in the neighborhood, that may not be characterized as high opportunity? So seemingly absurdly, I think the voucher system means that investors with enough capital are able to purchase and renovate homes and save them. And this is one thing that leads to voucher hotspots. So investors come into neighborhoods where real estate prices are low, and they sort of they develop these houses and they market to voucher holders. So this is one reason why we see voucher holders concentrated in particular areas, because this process has happened already. And it has to be admitted that the voucher system was designed with an underlying assumption about low-income neighborhoods, about neighborhoods with primarily people of color, is that people would want to move out of them. But an under-acknowledged strength of the voucher program is that it has driven investment in communities. Unfortunately, this kind of investment has meant that wealth that has been given to those communities is then flowing out of it through the voucher program. A durable policy, a complete policy, would mean keeping wealth within communities. So at the moment, we see, again, this process of an outside investment, voucher holders using their voucher to rent those houses, which are in the same neighborhoods that they might have lived before without a voucher. And sometimes the rent is artificially high, higher than it would be if they didn't have a voucher. And we see these developers really sort of benefiting in a way that I think the community itself, the neighborhoods itself, should be the recipient of those benefits. So public policy should support preservation in a meaningful way of neighborhoods, as well as supporting choice and mobility, so that each family can make the best choice for its own circumstances. Because there's an unimaginable amount of complexity in family life. There's an unimaginable amount of complexity in the choices that we make for our families. And I think in order to account for that, we really have to think about what choice means more clearly. So I want to invite you for a second to imagine durable policy. So a sometimes overlooked fact of the voucher program is that it can actually be used to purchase a home. So we live in one society. The gains of property owners and developers and the losses of renters are intertwined. For example, in Chicago, vouchers have only been used to purchase about 740 homes since 2002, which calculates out to about 39 homes per year, compared to a total of 41,000 voucher holders. So this rounds up to only about 2% of voucher holders that have taken advantage of this ability to actually purchase a home with the support of vouchers. But imagine flipping that number. So the places where voucher holders increasingly live have struggled for decades with disinvestment, job loss, underperforming schools, and violence. So imagine investing in these neighborhoods instead of writing them off. Access to long-term subsidized financing, subsidized home improvement loans, education, reevaluation of city rules and regulations that lead to disinvestment in neighborhoods, pathways to receiving some of the benefits of development and homeownership, such as loans so that residents of neighborhoods can develop local property, programs to connect people with these LIHTC benefits, which are so beneficial to developers, but can be complicated to use, and to help with the management of those benefits. Property ownership and neighborhood preservation is also a pathway to social mobility. And again, I think this is an overlooked aspect of the voucher conversation. And that the voucher program does not address neighborhood preservation or the value of networks and communities that already exist is also problematic. I think it goes without saying that a robust assistance program based on choice also has to step into this complex reality of the choices of others. So I think I'm running out of time. I think I might be just at time. But I hope that this was useful and helpful, and I look forward to hearing our next speakers.
Thank you. Really, really interesting broad perspective on the voucher program. Shed some good light on things. I know, Sharon, I felt like you were probably going over a mental checklist as Dr. Owens was talking. So we'll look forward to more from you in just a moment. If there are any quick questions before we move to the next speakers, we can take a couple of minutes for a question here. Otherwise, you may hold them to the end. I'll leave that to you. So if you have questions, go ahead and do an electronic raise hand, and Lori will call on you. So far, so good. I don't. Oh, okay.
Okay, Donna, I think you were first.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Lisa. Appreciate it. I have a quick question for this. I don't know how you say it, LIHTC tax credit for developers. If you say they're making profit off this, right, then, you know, what kind of quality control is in place? Are they making profit off it because when they're developing these places, they're really cheaply constructed? You know, I'm assuming they're not getting a ton of money, but it seems like something is wrong if they're taking wealth out of the community.
Hi, Donna. Yeah, that's a great question. So LIHTC is can drive some of these dynamics that you might suspect, sort of low quality development, things like that. It can also drive the type of low income housing being built that may not be accessible to everyone, like a kind of three-quarter market rate housing. And it can also drive other kinds of things that you might characterize as corruption or corruption-like. And the fact is these LIHTC credits are incredibly valuable. They can be used by developers. They can also be packaged into financial instruments. And so it's one way that developers can offset their costs, and it makes low income or affordable housing more sort of profitable for them to build, which of course then inspires people to build it. So it's kind of a tough balance to strike, but the fact is that, you know, you want people to be building housing, and one of the ways that the government does that, instead of like, you know, creating its own building squads or something like that, it inspires this to happen on the private market through the use of these credits. The other side is, especially when you're looking at, you know, like, you know, someone going into a neighborhood and buying 3, you know, abandoned houses or something like that. Yes, they're doing a service to the neighborhood. They're probably taking advantage of these LIHTC credits. And then they're marketing those houses to people with vouchers. It's arguably a good thing that those houses are now developed. They've been improved. People now have safe housing. This is all great. You can't argue with the fact that, you know, vouchers improve people's lives for sure. But I see an opportunity there, given what we know about the structure of wealth in America and how wealth is built in America, the history of, you know, neighborhoods that have been neglected, the history of redlining, the history of, you know, various social policies that have sort of relegated neighborhoods to this status that they found themselves in now, where developers can come in and buy 3 houses real cheap and fix them up and market them to developers. You know, this is a legacy that can be addressed through vouchers as well, by helping wealth stay in communities, by building up communities, by helping individuals also sort of gain access to wealth in their own communities, etc. So. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no more questions, I don't see any. So we are going to move on to our next team of speakers. Our next team is Michael Chavarria and Sharon Norwood. Having dedicated the last 8 years to fighting for fair housing around the state of Illinois, Michael Chavarria worked at several different Illinois-based fair housing organizations before joining HOPE as their executive director about a year ago. Michael possesses expertise in fair housing enforcement, investigative methods and policy, and has a background in coalition building to advance fair housing initiatives, pretty much at the state, local, and federal level. Hope Fair Housing, in conjunction with the Illinois Housing Coalition for Fair Housing, was instrumental in successfully advocating for passage of the sources of income protection law that Dr. Owens referenced. And that legislation was actively supported by our league. Sharon is a housing justice organizer with the Chicago Area Fair Housing Alliance. And Sharon has been directly impacted by the challenges surrounding accessibility of housing affordability and housing choice vouchers in particular. And she was one of the coalition leads fighting to get House Bill 2775, which is the sources of income bill, passed in Illinois. The power of her story moved many elected officials to support this important legislation. And so with that, we'll look forward to hearing from Michael and Sharon.
Thanks so much, Kathy. And thank you everyone here. Like Kathy mentioned, the League of Women Voters supported the effort to pass source of income protections and really was there at every step, all the calls to action, and it just went so far. The success of the campaign really did rely on groups like the League to push us across the finish line. So thank you. And thank you, Dr. Owens, for kicking off the conversation. That was wonderful. So the way we're going to approach this now, Sharon and I'm going to kind of do a little stage setting about where voucher discrimination plays into the issues that voucher holders face when trying to utilize their vouchers. I'll pass it over to Sharon to talk about her personal experience, and then we'll circle back and close out with discussion of the actual campaign to pass these protections. So, you know, again, before jumping into like what source of income discrimination looks like and why our coalition felt so compelled to work to attack it, I want to touch on where discrimination against voucher holders fits into the larger issue of unfair and unaffordable housing. So, and I think Dr. Owens touched on this quite a bit. So I'll try and keep things brief and just fill a few things out and localize when I can. So one big issue we have is we just have an insufficient number of vouchers. So in 2021, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities estimated that just 1 in 4 eligible families received federal rental assistance. They also found that 11.2 million households paid more than half of their income on rent. Of those, about half are either Black or Latino. And while, of course, people of all races experience housing affordability issues, it's clear when we think about who is experiencing this, that this isn't just an issue of economic justice, but it's also very much an issue of racial equity. When we continue to zoom in on the issue of housing and affordability, it really shouldn't surprise anyone here that this issue is so prevalent in Illinois. So last year, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition found that an average 2-bedroom unit in Illinois cost $1,186 a month. In order to afford that, you would have to earn an hourly wage of $22.80 an hour. So if you compare what you have to earn to the reality of wages in Illinois, you compare that to the fact that in Illinois, our minimum wage falls so short of that at just $12 an hour. It makes a lot of sense why so many families are struggling to afford their housing and why the number of vouchers is so insufficient. So at that minimum wage rate in Illinois, you would have to work 1.9 full-time jobs just to afford the basic necessity of having shelter, of having safety, having security, having a place where you can come home after work. And, you know, so I just wanted to kind of share a little bit about like the broader issue of trying to afford housing and what a struggle it can be. And I want, for anyone here who maybe hasn't experienced a struggle with housing affordability themselves, you probably know someone that has. You might not realize they have, but all of us certainly do, because this is just such a broad issue. So I want you to, if you haven't experienced this, I want you to just think about someone that you know has, or try and imagine yourself in that situation and think about all the sacrifices that you have to make in order to afford your home. And think about the fact that you learn about this voucher program, this great opportunity to offset this burden so that you can care for yourself, care for your children, whoever it is, that you can care for your responsibilities. So you add your name to the wait list. You find out the wait list is open. It hasn't been open in probably 10, 20 years, and you add your name to it. And then you wait. You might have to wait for 10 years. You might have to wait for 20 years. You might have to wait even longer to get your name picked on that voucher wait list. But one day, imagine one day your name gets picked. And you think that you have this sort of lifeline, this grand opportunity in front of you now that you're finally going to get this assistance. But you are almost immediately thrust into a broken system and confronted with this sort of collision course with paternalistic program designs that are just mummified in red tape. And I think Dr. Owens touched on that. So when you get into this program, the very first thing you're going to find out is that the rules are incredibly complicated. You're going to have to spend a good amount of time going to required classes, and you're going to have to spend an incredible amount of time trying to meet very tight deadlines. What you essentially have to do is study all of the rules of the program so that you know what your responsibilities are, how much your voucher is worth, how much it's worth in one zip code versus another, who you have to ask for permission to move, what potential issues a unit might cause the housing authority to reject it during its inspection, and when to submit what paperwork. And there's so much more you have to memorize. And in my time, I've spent a good amount of my career serving participants in voucher programs with overcoming these challenges. And I can't even guess how many times I've heard from individuals that through this all, just those first few months of having their voucher, that they earned a PhD. And what they're saying is that what they earned is a public housing doctorate, because they had to study and study and study just to understand how to benefit from this program that they waited decades for. And so continue imagining yourself in this situation, or someone that you care about or know who's been in this situation. You have this public housing doctorate, you're confident, you know what you need to do, but you quickly will realize that the voucher, while it might help you afford the rent, you have to play entirely by the housing authority's rules, and those rules change all the time. So for example, you might have to stick to the housing authority's timelines or face the penalty of losing your voucher forever. But the housing authority doesn't have to stick to their rules, to their guidelines, to their deadlines. So there's been a fair amount of reporting recently, including on the city of Chicago and the South Side, I think it's the South Side Weekly that did it, where they found that housing authorities are regularly failing to complete new lease ups, that's getting people in units within the time frame that is required by HUD in order to run these programs. Sometimes they're more than doubling the amount of time that's allowed. But if you flip that around and a voucher holder missed their deadline, they lose their voucher. Their children will not have support. Their family will not have support. They're off. There's no coming back. And despite all that, most participants in the program are resolved to weather all of the obstacles of the program itself. And they study these things, they overcome these things, and then they're confronted with probably the hardest barrier of being a participant in the program. And that's the bigoted perception of participants. We have perceptions on, just as Dr. Owens said, the race of those who use the program. You have in the city of Chicago and Cook County and most metro areas, major metro areas across the country, most programs are disproportionately representative of single Black mothers or people with disabilities or just families with children. These are all groups that we know through decades of studies of tracking fair housing complaints received by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. These are all groups that are overrepresented in the program that we know are already facing the highest levels of housing discrimination because of their race, their gender, the fact that they have a disability, the fact that they have children. So all of these barriers that are stacked up against people unjustly, these inalienable characteristics of theirs that they can't change and should never have to even think about. They should just be free to navigate the market just as everyone else can. But all of these things layer on top of each other. So in 2017, and there's been others, but this was one of the really stark findings. In 2017, the city of Chicago commissioned a study into the prevalence of source of income discrimination within the city. In that study, they found that nearly 50% of their investigations uncovered source of income discrimination. So when they were testing if landlords were committing source of income discrimination, they found that 50% of the time, yes, in fact, they were. And they also found that 20% of the time, there was both race-based and source of income-based discrimination. So this just kind of exemplifies how these issues layer on top of each other and really stacked against families who are just trying to secure this basic necessity of life. So I just wanted to kind of put it all together. This is a big part of why Hope Fair Housing Center and the other coalition members that worked on this felt so passionately that something needed to be done. Why so many of the community leaders who participated in this. And we're going to dive into the legislation that we worked on to finally inch us closer to eliminating source of income discrimination. But first, I'm going to pass it over to Sharon Norwood, who through all this has become a good friend of mine and one of my favorite colleagues, who has had to navigate all of these obstacles herself, and probably many more that I don't even know about, so that we can really understand why this matters and why this is value added to our state to have these protections. After that, we're gonna talk about the campaign that inched us closer to finally putting that choice into the housing choice voucher through the amendments of the Illinois Human Rights Act. So again, I just want to thank everyone here for allowing us to join you and for the support of the campaign. And I look forward to circling back to talk a little bit more about the campaign. Sharon, I'll shut up.
Thank you, Michael. And I just want to say thank you to the league. You guys were awesome with helping us get this through. I really appreciate it. We worked very hard together, and I hope we can continue on pushing for powerful legislation to make changes to actually help people. So I want to really thank you guys for being there and being on our side and getting this done. So again, my name is Sharon Norwood, and I'm a housing justice organizer for the Chicago Area Fair Housing Alliance, also known as CAFA. I'm a part of the Illinois Coalition of for Fair Housing. We worked extremely hard to get this legislation passed, but I wanted everybody to know who the legislators and people who wanted to get involved to know what it was like for a voucher holder. I am no longer a voucher holder, but I still identify as a voucher holder. So this video that's about to be shown, a small documentary, is a synopsis of my life being a voucher holder. You can play the video. I gotta do it.
Everybody can see this.
Don't be stingy. You're not funny. How many letters is in love? L. Oh.
Oh, you're hilarious.
E.
How many letters are in Stripe?
I have 6 children. 3 are foster. That's enough for you, Bucko. That's enough. I'm a mom of children that are disabled. I'm very involved with them in their lives. I take care of mom always. Remember when I was 7 years old and you said that my head was your head and you could do whatever you wanted?
To me, you're still 7 and still mine.
She's the strongest person I know, and I really look up to her. My strong willpower and everything, I got that from my mom.
Look at it, look at me.
You're an actor? Even though there are certain things supposed to be in place to protect familiar status, that's not necessarily true in what area you live in Illinois. I told you that was enough. So as a former member on the Section 8 program, which is really the Housing Choice Voucher program, I always paid my rent on time. Issues started maybe 2 years after we moved into our home. If the landlord has it in their contract that you have to make repairs if you want to keep your voucher, believe you me, you're going to make repairs. I've saved every receipt, and I have proof of everything that I've paid for. Things started getting bad. The water bill went over $1,000 a couple of times because the plumbing was bad. The electrical, completely outdated. That's why I'm paying $600-700 light bills. This is the initial letter that pretty much started everything. I had family members that needed to be put into my custody for foster care. Well, DCFS came and wrote a letter saying what my landlord needed to fix. The carpet needed to be removed. The plumbing needed to be repaired immediately to satisfy the home for the children to be placed in my custody. The landlord didn't respond within 30 days, so I had to spend my money to get the work done. I spent about $15,000 getting that house ready. Still dealing with everyday life, still paying the bills, still paying the rent on time. After 11 years, I never would have thought that the landlord and her daughter would have actually taken me to court and had us evicted. I paid my rent on time, and I paid for the repairs to the home and got every receipt to prove it. The judge did not want to see my receipts. The only thing she said to me was, yeah, but they want you out. The agreement in court was that we leave by March the 16th. The landlord showed up on March the 15th, changed the locks, and kicked me off the property. I was not allowed to come and get my stuff. Clothing, very important documents, social security numbers, birth certificates. It's ironic because March the 16th is the day that the governor shut down the state for COVID. We pretty much had to start over from scratch. And here's the block that I was raised on. My grandmother had a big home, immaculate. Feels like home. This is always home. This is where I learned everything at how to ride a bike, how to roller skate. It was just amazing how close the neighborhood, the neighbors were. My grandmother always wanted to keep her home just in case any of her kids or grandkids got into trouble. They'd always have a place to come to, always. With everything that I'm going through, that I've went through, I understand why it was so important to keep her home. My kids will always have a place to call home. No one would be able to put them out. Everything my grandmother talked about, it's like it's all, I'm seeing, I'm living what she talked about. I really didn't understand. I'm like, you pay your rent, nobody's gonna put you out. I thought people only got put out because they didn't pay rent. That's absolutely not true. And she knew that. That's what I take from her, that the importance of having your own home. I had always continued to look for housing and was denied when I called. Evergreen Park, where I live, has always had the stigma of being racist. Every time I'd call for a property in Evergreen Park, the realtors would immediately tell me, Section 8 is not welcome over here. No one would take a voucher for me to live in this area, to continue to live. So I had give up my voucher because it wasn't benefiting me. It really wasn't benefiting me. Evergreen Park is a hard place to live, but it's the right place for me to be to raise my children. Evergreen Park has the best school system for my disabled son. In Chicago, every school is segregated. He needs to be socialized. They all need to be socialized. My kids are going to get the best education to be able to compete in life, period. And that's what it's about for me. I've been dealing with a whole lot as a Black mother living here. They pretty much let you know that they really don't want you here. And I'm not going anywhere. I am a housing activist. We need that positive yes. We don't want to assume a yes. So we're making progress. It's slowly but surely we're going to make this happen. It's time to start talking to our legislators. I'm with Working Family Solidarity and Chicago Housing Justice League, our coalition. We're fighting for the just cause for eviction. Appreciate it. Working to get the legislations passed, which is the just cause for eviction, the source of income bill where people won't be discriminated against for their source of income when they're trying to rent property. And that's very much a real problem as well. Housing choice vouchers, emergency housing choice voucher holders. We want to talk to her about the just cause for eviction. That's fine. I try to appeal to them as a human being. Have a good day. I am in the middle of purchasing my first home. We're waiting for the underwriter to clear us to close. And there it is. God willing, I'll be a first-time homeowner. Isn't it beautiful? It's nothing like having your own.
Sharon, thank you so much for sharing your story with all of us. It was moving and inspiring, and you know, I think it just really highlights all of the things that the previous two speakers talked to us about, and really I think all of your voices together today really point to how there can be laws that really are people, but they're still not working for the people they're supposed to be helping. And your experience with that is as I said, really very moving. So I'm going to turn it back over to you and to Michael to talk a little bit about the steps that you and your organizations went through to continue to advocate for better housing regulations to help solve some of these ongoing problems.
Thank you. So yes, thank you for watching the video. And Michael is gonna advance some slides that we worked on to get the legislation started. Michael?
Sorry, give me a second. This is only my 1 millionth Zoom meeting, so I need to remember how to do this. All right, I'm gonna get back. So close, I promise. All right, can everyone see my screen? I can't see anyone.
Yes, we can see it, Michael.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, sorry, there's just so much going on my screen right now. All right, so yes, thank you, Sharon, for sharing that. You know, the one thing I want to emphasize is that Sharon was the voice of the coalition. The coalition was made up of so many people with so much expertise, but Sharon was the voice. She moved everyone that she talked to. She moved the unmovable to support this. So thank you for just continuing to share your story, because it is very powerful. So what I want to talk about now is House Bill 2775, which was the legislation that the Illinois Coalition for Fair Housing advocated for to prohibit source of income discrimination. Real quick, I just have to say this, it's a formality. Nothing here constitutes legal advice. This is just for informational purposes. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the new law does and such, and I just want to make sure everyone knows. If you or someone you know runs into this issue, to either contact an organization like Hope Fair Housing Center or to consult with an attorney with specialized expertise in fair housing. So with that, we'll touch on it real briefly. So what is source of income discrimination? The way we looked at this as a coalition, as an issue, we broke it down into the simplest terms possible. And really, it's when a real estate actor chooses to refuse someone's legal source of income, right? Like they're choosing to do this. It is the basis of the reason is that there was a choice made about the person's using these benefits or different types of income. And just as was discussed earlier, what we've found in our work is that it's almost always a proxy for other forms of discrimination. And so in Illinois, it was important to us to consider who's being impacted by this issue of source of income discrimination. And here in Illinois, and these numbers are honestly a bit outdated. I wanted to show where we were at as a coalition when we were working on this issue to move this legislation. Some of these numbers I'm going to share with you now have increased a bit. There was some relief and additional vouchers created through various COVID relief packages that created some new vouchers. But what we're talking about in the grand scheme of things is a very small percentage increase. The need, as I shared earlier, is still massively unmet. So here in Illinois, we have nearly 3,000 veterans, folks who have served their country to protect all of our American dreams, who returned and received, for one reason or another, qualified for what is called a Veteran Affairs Supportive Housing Voucher. This is a type of voucher that comes with extra VA benefits to help people get back on their feet after returning home. So there's nearly 3,000 veterans using these vouchers, facing this discrimination on a regular basis. When we look at just housing choice vouchers, the more standard program, the more general program, like the one Sharon discussed in the video, in Illinois, we have nearly 95,000 households using this. In addition, when we talk about source of income, it's not just vouchers that are being discriminated against because of their income, not just voucher holders. It's also people using certain types of incomes. So in Illinois, there's 214,000 individuals who receive survivor's benefits, for example, or 264,000 people who are receiving SSI, who also encounter source of income discrimination. And altogether in Illinois, about half of all households receive some income from non-wage sources. Non-wage sources are the kind of like the primary area where this source of income discrimination is taking place. But as I'll share later, it's also impacting people on the basis of where they work too. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And the way this impacts people, and I just really want to continue hammering the nail here, is what essentially happens when we look at these numbers, over 90,000 vouchers, 3,000 veterans, half of all Illinois households. So that means that we all have people we care about, probably people very close to us, in very close proximity to us, or very deep personal connections with, who might be experiencing homelessness despite having the means to afford their rent, or who do have a housing choice voucher, but don't actually have a choice in where they can live. Or they've waited years to get the voucher, but they eventually lose it because it expires before they ever find a landlord who will accept it. There's actually a really moving piece in the New York Times just this morning about a voucher holder's experience, a student, a young woman in Los Angeles who encountered this, and it walks through her experience. And I really encourage everyone to read that. I'm pretty sure it was just published this morning or maybe yesterday. And then we have other issues that compound and make the impact of source of income discrimination spread to others who weren't even inquiring about that unit in the first place. So what we find a lot is that a lot of our affordable housing options that are funded through tax credits and other programs not related to the voucher, they accept vouchers. The ones that are allowed to, they accept vouchers. And what happens is when people's options are so limited in communities, you have to go to these affordable housing options, already affordable housing options. And so you have a voucher holder who is limited in choice and is occupying an otherwise affordable unit that could have been made available to a household that didn't have that voucher. So one of the effects that's impacting people, and we heard a lot about this happening in Lake County, Illinois, is affordable housing stock is being reduced because they have to meet the needs of the voucher holders experiencing discrimination in the community. And so for anyone here who is like, I've been engaged in policy advocacy and housing advocacy for years, like, why did you guys choose to do this now? Like, this is kind of a classic fair housing fight in Illinois. Advocates have been working on this issue for over 20 years. When we pass this bill and we're having our just elated text message chains and email chains and conference celebrations, COVID made celebrating a little difficult. Some of the folks in the coalition were talking about when they first worked on the campaign, and they were storing their roll calls on floppy disks, and how they were going through their old records, and they're like, I don't even know how to look at this file anymore. Is it even possible? Like, this fight has been going on forever. And when we decided we wanted to re-engage in this fight, many people felt it was impossible, and that it might not be the best use of resources when there are so many affordable and fair housing legislative needs. But something had changed. A lot of us felt that the environment and the climate that was previously preventing this necessary protection from being added to the Illinois Human Rights Act, that environment had changed very abruptly. And the reason we were so confident that it changed, or at least we were so confident that it would be irresponsible for us not to try in this moment, was because of COVID. During COVID, we saw a staggering new number, 57,201. What that number represents is a sort of new type of subsidy that suddenly was born out of COVID. So if everyone remembers, there was this interesting thing happening during COVID. There was an eviction moratorium. And we saw pretty much the entire housing industry on the nightly news every evening, complaining that this eviction moratorium was driving them broke. And there's no doubt about it, not getting paid your rental income is going to impact your business. And so the federal government did something pretty surprising and dedicated a substantial amount of money for emergency rental assistance to help tenants stay current on their rent, catch up on past rent, and to keep landlords paid so that they can maintain their businesses and so that their businesses don't fall into disarray as a result of the eviction moratorium. In Illinois, the General Assembly dedicated an impressive amount of money from the CARES Act to emergency rental assistance. And we were all very excited. Many of the groups that eventually formed the coalition were actually responsible for getting the word out about this program. And what we found out was landlords were not accepting the program. So we FOIA'd the state, and what we found out, and it was that in a 2-month period of this program running, there was 57,201 instances of landlords not accepting the emergency rental assistance. So for the first time, we had an opportunity to show legislators that this was happening in their district, where before there were no voucher holders. And so these were the 10 groups here that created the Coalition for Fair Housing. And then it was Representative LaShawn Ford who brought the bill through the House of Representatives, Senator Ram Villavolam who brought it through the Senate. And you'll see a photo here of Sharon and one of our colleagues, Bob, with Housing Action Illinois during one of the committee hearings. And then it was over 100 organizations that supported the bill and helped us push this across the finish line. We couldn't have done it without a single one of these people or organizations listed on the screen. And I'm realizing that I'm moving a little bit slow here, so I'm going to start picking it up. So what the bill did was pretty simple. It added one new thing to the Illinois Human Rights Act. What you see here on your screen is all the protections you have at the federal, state, Cook County, and Chicago level. All we did was add this one protection. And what that protection says is that source of income means the lawful manner by which an individual supports himself or herself and his or her dependents. And that term, source of income, was added to that list of prohibited acts, meaning you can no longer discriminate against someone based on their source of income as defined here. And it was very general. It was intentionally general because the lawful manner by which an individual supports himself is inclusive of vouchers, of child alimony, child support, of alimony, of VASH vouchers, of really anything. And so the outcome of this law is that housing providers can no longer treat types of income preferentially. They cannot refuse to rent to someone because of their occupation. We saw that issue really kind of blow up during COVID. We had service industry workers who were being denied for fear of another shelter-in-place order that would shut down restaurants and bars. We had healthcare workers who were being denied because landlords were afraid they would come home with COVID. So you had the very people on the front line of protecting people from COVID being turned away from being able to secure housing because of the work that they were doing. This is going to protect people against having their emergency rental assistance discriminated against, of course, voucher holders. And the big thing is for those in Illinois that already had source of income protections, what this changes for them is that they can now seek justice in state court, which means the penalties for breaking this law are much more severe. So the incentive to follow the law is much stronger than it previously was for places that had already had some form of protection in place. It also has changes for home buyers. So this doesn't change underwriting or lending decisions. Underwriting decisions are actually exempt from this particular protection due to some opposition, but public assistance like vouchers and things like that are already protected through the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So for the coalition, this was a bit of an acceptable negotiation to exclude the lending. But it is going to extend protections to FHA borrowers and VA borrowers who also experience source of income discrimination. Because what happens is they also have additional inspection requirements, or there's perceptions about who uses these programs. And so if you were to just do a search, you can probably go on one of the major real estate sites and search no FHA, and you'd find things. It's a common issue. And the idea that you would tell a veteran that they can't use their veteran loan to purchase a home is beyond absurd. And Dr. Owens mentioned earlier the home ownership voucher. In the Chicago area, which is the largest home ownership voucher program in Illinois, there are a lot of people who've gone through all of the work of getting that home ownership voucher and saving their money for the down payment, who then are having their type of funding denied and being prevented from accessing home ownership. So all these groups are now going to be protected. And so if you or anyone experiences this, definitely reach out to groups like Hope Fair Housing. All we need to know is who you spoke to, what the address was, what was said, when it happened for statute of limitations considerations. And we would ask that you save any communications or voicemails that have been had, because that is the evidence when saving any ads or listings. Here, and I think everyone will have a copy of this. This is just some of the groups serving outside of the city of Chicago. So in case anyone's interested or wants to learn more. And I just want to say this last thing I'm going to say, I know I'm over. The reason it's so important to enforce these rights, if you or someone has experienced this discrimination, is because there's remedies that have big impacts and big effects, not just for the individual person who's experienced this, but for others. So through the enforcement processes, you have the ability to file a temporary restraining order. So if a landlord says, I'm not going to rent this to you because you have a voucher, we can try and get a temporary restraining order to say, actually, you can't rent this unit out until we settle this matter and determine whether or not you violated the Illinois Human Rights Act. So we can help people through the enforcement process to actually secure that housing or get new housing. We can require the landlord to change their policy so that this never impacts someone ever again. We can even try and require things such as set-asides for vouchers to make sure there's opportunities in the future. We can recover monetary damages to make the victim whole for any emotional distress or opportunity cost or expenses they incurred. Et cetera, et cetera. And another big piece is the punitive damages. So that's when you are making discrimination so expensive that you won't do it again, and that others who are aware of what happened to that landlord won't do it again. If anyone wants to learn more, this is mine and Sharon's info. We do in-depth trainings at Hope Fair Housing Center. We serve victims of discrimination through the enforcement process. So we can kind of come out to any community from Iowa to Missouri. So not the actual states, from the borders. So let us know.
Thank you. And if anyone has questions, if they would raise their hands virtually.
I'm going to go ahead and jump in with one, since I don't see a hand raised, but please don't let me keep anybody else from raising their hand. Have you, I know this is a fairly newly implemented law. What kind of actions have you seen potential renters taking so far? Are you seeing this still be a problem? Are landlords complying? Just kind of wondering if from a fair housing perspective, you've seen a lot of activity pop up that people aren't complying with the law.
I'll touch on this, and then Sharon, if you want to add anything. So we're seeing a lot of issues still. It's going to take a lot of time. And that's why I talked about the importance of filing the complaint there at the end. We need to communicate to the housing industry community that chooses to discriminate, that if they do so, they're going to go broke, right? That is the mechanism that will change behavior. We've gotten an incredible number of complaints from all across the state. What we're finding is that we're reaching places in the state that we previously didn't have a strong presence, especially in far southern Illinois, where this is an issue. We've seen a lot of individuals be able to use the educational materials the coalition created to self-advocate and to turn denials into housing opportunities, which has been wonderful to watch. We've seen housing authorities staff kind of use these materials to also educate their communities and to stand up for their clients when they're being met with denials. But we're also still seeing an issue of discrimination. And like Dr. Owens said about how some things can be weaponized and landlords can find clever loopholes to stop people, like minimum income requirements. We're seeing landlords try that. Now we're confident that these minimum income requirements will be successfully challenged. It's just going to take time for us to build the cases, so we have the case law to change behaviors.
Can I jump in, Mike? And because we're doing these trainings and getting the word out that this law has been passed, we have been seeing a number of individuals stepping forth who are no longer afraid to speak about the discrimination that they're faced. Because what we've learned with all of this is landlords retaliate. Basically, what happened to me, my landlord retaliated against me, and I had no one to help me. So now with this issue, they're coming out. They're able to speak, and we're able to actually help them. So mission has been accomplished. It's a lot. It's a long way to go, but you know, we are confident that we will be able to take on these landlords that are discriminating and get some results, some great results behind it.
Okay.
Lori, I
Kathy?
know the time is up, but I have left the meeting open. If we look like we've got two, maybe we can squeeze in these two questions before it ends.
Okay, Susan Gregory is up next.
Hi there. Thanks so much for these presentations and for all the work behind getting this law passed. We see more and more that there are larger residential properties that are owned by corporations and not individuals. Have you seen so far any examples where someone is discriminated against by a landlord who's really a corporation, where it's much harder to bankrupt them by the actions that you're describing for an individual property owner?
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of diversity in who the bad actors are. You know, so I don't want to sound too crazy about the whole bankrupted thing, but you know, there's differences between the begrudged small landlord who takes, you know, personal offense to being accused of discrimination, who won't change behavior because of the accusation. Sometimes the large housing providers are actually easier to work with because they have to pull in general counsel. They have to pull in insurance policies who say, you guys messed up. If you still want us to cover you, you're going to change X, Y, Z and show me how. So they're very different fights, but we're seeing it Absolutely. In all sorts of communities, including communities that, you know, kind of pride themselves on diversity. On this issue, they're still struggling to catch up.
Thank you.
Like we've only got a couple seconds left. Anne, if you've got a quick question, maybe we can squeeze it in.
Thank you. I missed a portion of this, so if you answered this, I apologize. But a few years ago, when Cook County enacted source of income protections, our suburb immediately, based on their home rule status, opted out of it initially. They're back in now, but would this legislation
Still hear me?
No, stop that recording.
Sarah, we're
somebody.
not in the breakout room anymore, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All right.
the problem is that the breakout room I was in did not close, so I was the recording and
Oh,
now
okay,
it should
all right.
close.
All right, so it's all stopped now?
Should be.
All
Yeah, the
right.
breakout room is.
No, it's
we're
still
all
recording.
kicked out.
You
Someone is still
successfully
recording.
kicked me out, Rosemary.
Oh, all right, we want to, you know what, we're going to delete this room. I'm going to just delete them all. And then we won't have to worry about them anymore.
The
well-
recording is still going on. Yes.
I can't stop the recording because we're no longer in the chat and it went out before I could stop it.
Oh, is it your recording?
I think it's my recording. I tried to go out of it.
Oh, now I can do it. I got it. Okay, now I
Okay,
can stop
thank
it.
you.
Oh, oof.
It's still going.
Oh.